Chapter 13, St. Patrick's Cathedral. We had a radio contest that we knew would create a lot of attention. This wasn't the first time we had done it, but it ended up being the last. We promoted the contest months in advance and had all these couples audition, which we narrowed down to 5. These couples would be accompanied by a chaperone to verify that they actually accomplished the task given to them. The chaperones included Rich Voss, Stephen Lynch, Ben Sparks, Rick Delgado, and of course Paul Marcurio, who became key in this story. The winner would get a trip to Boston to the Samuel Adams Brewery for a beer tasting tour and a Sox game. For this Sex for Sam contest, the couples got a huge list of famous New York City landmarks to have sex in. The couple who had intercourse in 5 of these places and posted the highest score would win. The Empire State Building, FAO Schwartz, Hard Rock Cafe, the Rockefeller Building, and an ESPN van were a few of the places. At the bottom of the list for this year only, Opie added a church. We had so many landmarks to choose from that adding a church to the list was almost just for a laugh. On the show that day when we announced the landmarks, we said it last. Blah, 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 and a church. We never in a million years expected anyone to actually pick the church. The chaperones would follow these contestants and would call into the studio and make it sound like it was a sporting event. I'd be like, okay, we have Ben Sparks in the Empire State Building with a couple. What do you got, Ben? Well, we're here at the Empire State Building with this couple, and yes, they're doing it. They're doing it doggy style right now. We had a point system with certain bonuses. If the guy stuck his dick up her ass, the team was awarded a 2-point conversion. The harder the location, the higher the point value. Central Park had a lower point value because it was easier to find a place to bang than in a church, which had the highest point value. We took calls during the contest and we got one from chaperone Paul Marcurio. Within a second he was telling us, we're here at St. Patrick's Cathedral and he's doing a 2-point conversion. Here's where we came to the radio conundrum that has haunted us for years upon years. Opie and I looked at each other knowing this was bad, but this was also great radio. We knew that for listeners to hear that he was fucking her in the ass at St. Patrick's Cathedral was great. As far as the people at the church, mayor's office, police department, and FCC, and our bosses were concerned, it wasn't good. So what do you opt for when you literally have 7 seconds to hit that dump button? Opie, Al Dukes, the guy down the hall in the locked room, and I all had the ability to hit this dump button that could have wiped out the call. This guy Al Dukes had been brought in from CBS because they didn't trust us and wanted a company guy there in case of something just like this. It was his job to make the executive decision about what was appropriate for the airwaves. Ironically, he was the only one who came out of this unscathed. We could have hung up the phone and continued our lives as the Opie and Anthony show on WNEW. No one hit the dump button. That was the mindset of what our radio show has become. I thought about it and looked at Opie, and he knew we had this option as well. All I knew was that this was one more outrageous than what we had done in the previous day, and we needed to be more outrageous every day. We never hit that button, and then we kicked it into high gear. Really, Paul? What's going on? Well, we're here by the front door, and he's pumping her really hard. Oh wait, there's someone coming over to us. Now again, we could have said, run! But we chose to get the play-by-play asking, who's coming over? We wanted that dialogue between whoever was coming over and Paul, who was going to attempt to justify this couple's having anal sex by the front door of the most highly regarded religious landmark in the United States. It was one of the security guards from St. Pat's. We were now listening to the back and forth between Paul and the security guard. The security guy was like, what is going on here? Why are you two pulling up your pants? Oh no. Don't worry, it's just a radio contest. Again, they could have left. The guard said, I'm calling the cops. Paul and the couple should have hightailed it the fuck out of there. Paul was arguing with the guy because he'd been a regular on our show and we'd love when he was confrontational on the phone. This wasn't his first rodeo for us. One time Paul went to a Broadway show starring Kathleen Turner that was controversial because she took her top off during the play. Paul was sitting in the middle of the theater and was on the phone with our show. She was in the scene where she was going to take off her shirt and he was telling us she's doing it now. And we heard him yell, "Hey Kathleen, put your goddamn shirt back on." We could actually hear the gasp of horror from the audience. Then security came over to remove him from the theater. Paul demanded he get his money back, and they gave it to him. Knowing we loved this from him, he kept it going with the security guard in St. Patrick's up until the police came. Once the cops came, all bets were off. There was no leaving. We were riding this whole thing out with him. We heard everything up until Paul was handcuffed. They arrested Paul and the couple, who, by the way, did get the highest points for the place, but sadly didn't win the contest with their overall score. Mind you, other than Paul, no one else had witnessed the sex act. The security guard only saw them pulling up their pants. At first, he thought they were defecating. Jesus. They never ended up getting charged with anything and were released. Nonetheless, it had already been put out there by the news that a couple had been caught fucking in St. Patrick's Cathedral. Then when people found out about it, and we were being highlighted as the ones who had orchestrated this event, we knew it was going to be similar to our situation with the mayor of Boston. Our first reaction was, here it is, O&A, back in the news, we're outrageous. Then some people started to become outraged. The Catholic League said, did you know that this particular day on the Catholic calendar has significance? 365 days, and of course, it's the day of something. They started really turning the screws on management. We went on the air the next day, and our final guest on WNEW was, of all people, Brian Regan, who happened to have been our first guest on this show. We went full circle with Brian bringing us in and taking us out. The story became national news and even became exaggerated. We heard people thinking Opie and I had fucked each other in the church. So crazy. In an ironic way, Opie did fuck me by coming up with the idea of adding that church to the list, and I didn't even get a 2-point conversion for it. Then, once again, they had an internal investigation and suspended us while they found out who else was involved so they can fire them also. About a week later, Jim, Opie, and I, after having lunch, were walking towards Opie's apartment when Bob Eatman called us. Opie put him on speakerphone and Bob told us, they canceled the show. Your show is canceled. I was driving home to Brooklyn and saw this bus driver pushed up newspaper in the front window, and it said, Opie and Dopey. I vividly remember saying out loud, I'm Dopey? We had signed a 3-year deal with WNEW, not knowing that after a year our show would be off the air. We would still get paid millions for 2 full years without being allowed to work. They said, here's your contract, and we're holding you to it. We're canceling your show, but still paying you in full, and you're not allowed to get another job. Have fun. They knew we'd go right to Clear Channel and compete against Howard Stern. They kept us from working for 2 years. It wasn't all bad news. When you see your bank account just grow exponentially every time you look at it, and you know it's going to be happening for 2 years without any responsibility, it's pure bliss. I could just pick up and fly anywhere in the world on a whim. It wasn't the healthiest lifestyle with the drinking, gambling, smoking, and no structure or hours to be accounted for, with unlimited money. If I were a drug addict, I surely would have died. Looking back, if there was ever an addiction, Opie and I shared it. It was that need to constantly top ourselves and make our show the most talked about. We wanted our ratings to always go up and our listeners to be rewarded daily with our insanity. It was inevitable that we were going to get fired from WNEW. The thread finally broke and the piano crushed us. Chapter 14. Limbo. Initially, the hard part of being fired was trying to convince my family that everything was okay. I certainly didn't know or think it was. Opie and I were damaged goods, and as fucked up as you could possibly be in the radio biz. Even when our contract was up in 2 years, we might attract zero interest. I thought this time we really might have done it to ourselves to the point of no coming back. We had fucked up bad, and it was frightening. My family had been so proud and amazed at what I had accomplished in this industry. It went from their seeing me as a completely irresponsible employee in the real working world to their knowing I was a multi-millionaire radio personality. Prior to this success, I had been the one in the family everyone was constantly worrying about. Is Aunt going to be able to pay his rent? It wouldn't have been a stretch for me to be knocking on their door asking for a place to sleep. I was that guy. To have transcended from that to what we have accomplished in Boston and then New York was beyond anything my family or I could ever have imagined. It wasn't like I had the luxury of hiding my firing. I was on the cover of the newspaper as half of Opie and Dopey, and had to reassure my family that this was just part of the business, that I'd been through this before and I would totally get another radio gig. I didn't even know if I could put it across believably because I didn't believe it when I was saying it, but it was important for me to put them all at ease. The worst part of our being fired was not being able to get another job for the duration of 2 years. That's a long time not to work and to be far removed from our fans. I was still getting paid and had all this money pouring in with 24 hours in a day to fill by doing nothing. I started realizing how important structure was and having something to do except spending insane amounts of money to entertain myself. I found it hard trying to fill my day. On paper, it sounds great, having a ton of money and nothing to do with zero responsibility. During this time, I was living with my girlfriend, Melinda, in Brooklyn on Shore Road. Melinda was the bright side of all this. We were having fun and would travel together. We vacationed on the opulent Atlantis Hotel in the Bahamas for 2 weeks. As we were checking out, I said, "What are we going to do when we get home?" She was like, "I don't know." We were rolling our luggage past the front desk and I said, "You know what? Can we get our room for another 2 weeks?" We went right back upstairs and stayed a month at the resort. It's difficult not to have the mindset of someone who has something to do. It's been 2 weeks but there's nothing after, and we traveled to California. I bought a radio-controlled helicopter because I read an article about one and was like, yep, I'll get that. That'll be a hobby for a few months. I've always had a love of rifles and shooting since I was a boy. I currently have a New York State and city pistol permit and carry a gun everywhere I go. The fun and sportsmanship of shooting is amazing. I'm not a hunter. I understand people who are and hold nothing against them. I just always felt bad. You shoot something that was hopping around a moment and before and now it's gone. I'd rather shoot at targets without the guilt. I like all types of guns and rifles. I own a Barrett 50 caliber that you can shoot from a mile and take someone's fucking head off. They're just fun to shoot. I don't care how much of a liberal someone is. The second they hold that stock against their shoulder and pull that trigger, an unbelievable explosion happens. The pressure changes around you, and you feel like you have the flu for 3 seconds. Then you start laughing your ass off. It's one of those primal things men just like, and I've always been fascinated with it. My father always had guns, and he taught me at a very young age how to shoot. Safety was always paramount. I just enjoy guns, and of course, like the idea of being able to protect myself. I've been called paranoid and heard people say, "You must have a small dick if you need a gun." Well, not if the other person has one. Read the news. Shit does happen. I'd rather be on even footing with whoever my potential assailant is. I don't want to get into a knife fight with a guy or a fist fight with someone who is 2 times my size. I'm certainly extremely level-headed. I'm not the type of person rolling down my car window and saying, "I'll put a cap in your ass, motherfucker." I'm the type of person who when someone rolls down their window and says that to me, will be able to retort, "No you won't, motherfucker." So guns, traveling, and a remote control helicopter help keep me busy. You can only bang your girlfriend and jerk off so many times. If I had been fired from a job I hated, this would have been a dream come true. You mean I don't have to go to work, but I still get paid for the same amount of time as if I did? I don't have to go into an attic with insulation. I don't have to cut a hole out of a rooftop, and I'm still going to get paid. But it was different because I had been doing radio, and it was the greatest job in the world. Radio was something I relished doing. I loved the fans, the notoriety, and the compliments from people walking down the street. Knowing every day that passed was yet another day the fans wouldn't hear me on the air was excruciating. I wasn't even 100% sure there was going to be a next time. The last thing I wanted was to be a non-issue, irrelevant, and someone who wasn't in the game anymore. We were in our prime and never more popular when this transpired. It sucks not to be working in any phase of a gig you love. Not to work at the height of our popularity when we were at the top of our game was torture. No matter how much fun I had spending my money, I always felt I'd rather be working for it. Aside from the divorce and Melinda, this firing was instrumental in the deteriorating relationship Opie and I began to have. We didn't have that constant daily contact anymore. We couldn't relate to a lot of things the other person did as an individual without radio being the central bonding point. Opie went out to some of Jim Norton's gigs during this time. Oddly enough, Opie and Jimmy were closer than I was with either of them. I was the only one who was cut off and alone. That didn't bother me in the least. I had Melinda, and that was more than content. I just missed the working element. It was a void that nothing could fill in my heart. And my health had deteriorated so badly at the ripe old age of 42, I had to have put a stent in. All the drinking, smoking, and eating fast food while using the minimal amount of movement playing video games had taken its toll. I had pains in my chest. I was like, this isn't normal, and got it checked out. They told me I need a stent procedure. I decided to quit smoking and give up fast food. I still needed to drink, gamble, and play video games. I'm only human, for Christ's sake. Seriously, this was a life-changing time when I realized I needed to work out and eat more healthfully. It wasn't like I was training for a triathlon. I just didn't want to be found dead with a controller in my hand in front of my TV and have people think, wow, he really took Call of Duty seriously. Chapter 15. XM, A Second Chance. We tried having our agent, Bob Eatman, negotiate our return. Can we settle this to where you pay them a percentage and allow them to work? Can we get them out of their contract? We were willing to take less money, we said. Look, give us half of it, and then we'll just go to work. We knew we could make that money working somewhere else, and that getting back on the air was the most important thing to both of us. They didn't budge and wouldn't let us out of our deal. It was legal for Bob to start talking to other companies a few months before the contract expired. CBS had the choice to match whatever someone else offered, but they wanted nothing to do with us anymore. The people at Clear Channel had changed management, and we weren't an option. We were damaged goods, and FM radio wanted to keep its distance as well. Bob came to us and said, "Hey guys, I talked with the people at XM Satellite Radio," to which our initial reaction was, fuck. Satellite radio was radio jail. It was where everyone who couldn't be on regular radio went. Whether it was for lack of talent or being persona non grata, it was not the first place you'd want to go as a radio personality. FM was the place you wanted to be. Nonetheless, this relatively new entertainment medium was our only option. There were two satellite companies, XM and Sirius. They were completely separate entities back then. Sirius was more like regular FM radio. They played mostly music and had regular jocks spinning tunes. XM was weirder and eccentric, or eclectic. They wanted it to be what radio wasn't. They wanted to transcend FM radio and not do the same hacky bits. You'll never hear a top 500 countdown on the 4th of July. They wanted to do different things with broadcasting and saw this as the future of radio. Bob was negotiating with both Sirius and XM to drive up our money. All of a sudden, for unknown reasons, Sirius cut us off and never spoke to us again. We asked Bob, "What's going on? What happened?" He said he didn't know. Then it was announced that Howard Stern was going to Sirius. We just couldn't get away from this fucking guy. We had two companies bidding on us, and in came Howard. Sirius was no longer an option. They nabbed the best guy in the business. That left us with XM and doing morning shows competing against Howard. We signed the contract on August 3rd, 2004 at XM headquarters in Washington, D.C., followed by a public announcement and press conference at the Hard Rock Cafe 2 days later. Our first official show was planned for October 4th. We knew we wouldn't be reaching the same number of listeners we had been accustomed to on terrestrial FM radio. We went from millions of listeners to a step up from those militant black Hebrew Israelites screaming into a bullhorn at Times Square. Even if we had the entire XM audience listen to us all at once, it wouldn't equate to even a tenth of what we had when we were syndicated on FM radio. The reality is, we couldn't get to everyone. Realistically speaking, we were probably talking to fewer than 20,000 people a day, which was very depressing. When we first got to XM, they wanted to brand us with our own channel. We wanted a good name, something that represented us in this type of show our fans expected. Unbeknownst to us, XM had already decided to label our channel High Voltage. High Voltage? It was ridiculous, and after our first contract negotiation, our first order of business was to change the name. We went with the virus, because once we got on the air, we would be contagious and eat away at the competition. We were doing the morning drive, which just killed me. The last thing I wanted to do was wake up and do morning radio. I'm an afternoon guy. I started second-guessing myself, wondering if I could even do radio without having a few beers. I don't think I'd ever done radio without drinking, but I knew there was no way I was going to start sipping brews at 6 a.m. after my wake-up call with the stent procedure. That wasn't an option. It's weird how I questioned if I could be entertaining without the social lubricant of alcohol. Thank God it worked out. Who knew? I was pretty successful without drinking on a daily basis. Miracles do happen. XM was very supportive of the show and built us our own very beautiful state-of-the-art studio on 57th Street between 6th and 7th Avenues, which also happened to be on top of the old Steinway piano showroom. A frequent guest on the show in those days was a comic named John Valby, aka Dr. Dirty. He'd come in with a little Casio keyboard and play at the console. He saw our new studio for the first time and was like, wow, the Steinway showroom is downstairs? It's beautiful. Sorry, here's a recipe. We came up with the idea for one of our producers to take him downstairs. It's fucking Steinway pianos. The showroom was the most stuffiest, most pretentious environment in Manhattan, with all those gorgeous $1 million pianos. Valby is a classically trained pianist who is a virtuoso on the keys. We took him downstairs with microphones and had him talk to one of the salespeople at Steinway. John looked like a homeless person and smelled like one. The salesman was feeling him out. Do you play? How many years? He didn't know John from a hole in the wall. John sat down there and there were 3 employees along with the store manager watching him. He began playing this beautiful classic concerto, transitioning into some honky-tonk and ragtime music. We were listening, and our producer had an earpiece and could hear the show with us, talking while John was performing. John then went into his comedy act, which consisted of extremely vulgar song parodies. He started singing, I was out on a date in my daddy's car. I picked her up in a Manhattan bar. I finger fucked her clit. I had my cock in her throat too deep. I was pumping her face. My pecker started to spit. The doctor said the bitch had an epileptic fit. Where, oh where can my pecker be? Ah, fuck, I fucked that up, didn't I? The Steinway people were not laughing and were completely appalled. We asked if we could play one more quick one before they called the police, and he did a parody of my favorite things that went like this. Oh, God. Blowjobs and handjobs and eating clitoris, watching your grandmother douche at church service, brown public cunt hairs and toilet bowl rings. These are a few of my favorite things. Mission accomplished. This was the essence of our show. I love that guy, by the way. Find what's around us to go for it. Don't worry about trouble or Steinway calling our boss. That never entered our minds. Do it, and if you get into trouble, try to find a way out of it. Because Howard Stern left 92.3 K-Rock for Sirius Radio, K-Rock needed a new morning show. They replaced Howard with David Lee Roth, the former lead singer of Van Halen. David had been a guest on Howard's show from time to time and told some entertaining stories. David talks a mile a minute. Howard had the talent to rein him in. If you're a good interviewee, then your interviewer is part of that. They know that when to tell you to shut the fuck up and move on to another story. Without that kind of governor micromanaging him, David Lee Roth might have been one of the worst people ever on radio. Non-stop rambling about 18 different topics at a time and then throwing in a bozy bop, but it up, just awful radio. And they fired him faster than you could say Sammy Hagar. CBS went from making huge amounts of money with Howard to making nothing with David Lee Roth. Here's where money comes in. The same company that had fired us for the Sex for Sam contest and kept us on the payroll for 2 years while not letting us work for anyone else, hired us back. It was announced on April 24th, 2006, that we were now taking over Howard Stern's old stomping grounds and doing the morning show on K-Rock. We had just signed the contract with XM for the morning shows, and K-Rock said, let's work out some kind of deal where you can do both. So we were on K-Rock and XM simultaneously. Now, obviously, satellite is unrestricted, and K-Rock had to adhere to FCC rules. This meant that for the first 3 hours of our show, we couldn't curse or talk graphically about sex or any other controversial topic. At 9 a.m., we walked over to the studio that XM had built for us and did uncensored show until 11. The walk between studios was just a few blocks, and we had to decide what we were going to do during the length of time it took to make that walk. We came up with the idea of taking a shopping cart with a microwave transmitter battery pack and broadcasting our walk on the way over to the XM studio. We had mics and our guests walk with us on 57th Street in Manhattan. It became a really cool part of the show that was the catalyst for some really funny bits that our paid subscribers were able to enjoy. We'd have a gag in which Rich Voss would go into restaurant Rue 57 with a microphone and just started doing his act for the patrons eating breakfast. They were like, "What the fuck is this guy doing?" And we'd have Jim Norton buy hardcore gay pornography from the magazine stands on 57th Street and pose questions to the street vendor and other customers. We would talk to the homeless. Opie is still in trouble with people to this day because of what he did to one homeless guy. Andrew, Andrew, who offered us a piece of cake. Opie just stomped on it with his foot. The poor guy was just sitting there saying, "I paid for that cake. I earned that cake." Opie didn't give a shit as long as it was good radio. The great thing is that the listeners got to join us every day for a different adventure on this walk. Sometimes our fans would wait outside the building for us to come out and would walk with us. We'd have anywhere from 10 to 50 people following us down the street. If we were talking to a homeless guy, they'd throw money to the dude. It was like a windfall for these people. One of our funniest bits with this, the comedian Patrice O'Neill called it nigger versus Nazi. During this time period, the actor Danny Glover had made his plight known publicly that he couldn't get a cab in New York City because he was African American. Patrice was on the show and we were talking about it and he said, "Yeah, nobody wants to pick up a nigger." I was like, "Hey, I have a Nazi helmet. I'll put it on and you stand upstream for me. We'll both try and hail a cab to see who the cab driver picks up, a nigger or a Nazi." The first cab blatantly passed by Patrice and stopped for me. Patrice screamed, "Nazi, Nazi! You pick up a Nazi over a nigger, you motherfucker! You didn't stop for a nigger, you picked up a goddamn Nazi over a nigger, you chose a Nazi, brother!" Holy fuck. The second cab stopped for Patrice. The third cab hedged its bets and went between us. The next one went for the Nazi. Patrice said, "I'm gonna pull this out for the niggers." Then Patrice tied it up and it was going to game 7. The deciding cab passed right by Patrice and stopped in front of me. I thanked him for picking up a Nazi over an African American. The Nazis won. Crazy shit. In 2006, our show did a comedy tour called the Virus Comedy Tour. This was for all our huge market cities like New York, Boston, Cleveland, and Philly. The tour included Otto and George, Patrice O'Neill, Rich Voss, Louis C.K., Bob Kelly, and Bob Saget. We also sprinkled in other comics throughout the tour, including Ralphie May, Tracy Morgan, Frank Caliendo, Joe Rogan, Jim Brewer, Carlos Mencia, Dom Irrera, and of course, Bill Burr. Any other audience would have just sat, listened, and laughed. Our audience was composed of a bunch of maniacs. This wasn't a normal comedy show. It wasn't like there was a show at 8 p.m. and they'd get in there an hour before with the show and leave. We had stuff going on all day prior to the show as a build-up. There was a petting pen where we'd have Stalker Patty along with Big A corralled off in hay. You could feed them, plus dunking booths and other side shows to entertain our fans. It was an event filled with freaks and debauchery. We had passionate fans who were really into it, and they knew how we treated each other on the show. Comics busting each other's balls. We brought the audience into what we were doing. They genuinely felt like they were part of it. The only negative to this was that they felt they were also part of the stand-up show. They felt entitled to heckle the comics unmercifully, which sometimes made the shows a fucking nightmare. We take the bad with the good, and the good with the bad. It happened, and as we understood it, they were enjoying themselves, so be it. Our third show of the tour was in Philadelphia, and Philly is just notorious for being ruthless. Everyone is well aware of the Eagles fans who threw fucking snowballs at Santa Claus. Philly's own Dom Irrera was booed off the stage. It was brutal. Dom just disappeared. He was shell-shocked. Next up was Bill Burr. There was a digital clock facing the comic that would count down their time on stage. I think the sets were 15 minutes long. Bill got huge applause when he walked onto the stage and the clock started ticking down. Almost immediately after the applause, they started booing and yelling shit at him. Bill wasn't going to take it. "Really? Really?" Bill just started lambasting the crowd with a history lesson of Philadelphia and the inadequacies of Philadelphians. This guy knew everything there was to know about Philly. I defy a historian to know as much as Bill Burr knew that night about the city of brotherly love. He destroyed them. He referenced pulp culture, sports, personalities, and the fucking Revolutionary War. Everything he brought up was a twist of the knife screwing Philadelphia, and the audience loved it. He told them, I wish you'd all die, and the Eagles never win a fucking Super Bowl. Fuck all you motherfuckers and fuck the Flyers. Booing Dom Herrera? You can all suck my dick. What do you want me to talk about? Heart disease? I'm going to all of your funerals and it's gonna be great. He started getting the audience to listen and laugh. He started counting down the show. 11 more minutes of this. Terrorists will never bomb you people because the terrorists know you're worthless and nobody cares about you. You are this high above New Orleans. You are this high above New Orleans. FEMA would never show up for you assholes. He would keep counting down the clock in between disparaging comments about the audience in Philadelphia. Bill waged war against this audience and made the impossible possible. He turned them. They went from booing to cheering and applauding. When he got done, he threw the mic down and received a full standing ovation. He won them over and actually got national recognition for it. This was a career moment for Bill. Unfortunately, the next gig was in Cleveland and they thought that Bill could recreate that with them. Bill was like, fuck that. He didn't know anything about Cleveland. What was he supposed to do? Walk around with an encyclopedia about each city we'd perform in? He'd want to nip that in the bud, and he did. XM was a completely different animal because it was uncensored. All the things we had to adhere to with the FCC on FM radio were thrown out the window. Saying fuck in front of a microphone was the weirdest thing. I'd say it and be like, oh no, hit the dump button. I had gotten used to doing radio without cursing most of the time. Sometimes it fits, and it's a great show, great to throw out a fuck or shit out there. When I'm telling a story, I'd rather spin it in a way that I don't have to just blurt out the 7 dirty words. It was a new feel for radio. We could describe sex and bodily functions without corporate lawyers getting on us. Race and being politically correct were always issues, even on satellite radio. Even though we were on a censor-free network that wanted to be cutting edge, we still almost got fired right away. I'm talking right the fuck out of the starting gate. Leave it to Opie and Anthony to push the parameters on a censor-free network their first couple of months working. There was this funny homeless guy down the street from our studio who would talk all this outrageous shit. We decided to give this impoverished man a voice and let this batshit crazy guy get in front of our microphone. We brought him up to our studio and let him talk. He was actually pretty sharp and had some ideas, one of which was that he wanted to rape the First Lady, Laura Bush. He also wanted to rape the Queen of England and Condoleezza Rice. We were just laughing our asses off at the whole thing and how crazy he was. We got done with the show, feeling good about it. Then we started getting phone calls. People are getting concerned. We're getting these complaints, and the bosses are a little upset about it. What? This is satellite radio. This is absolutely what should be going out over the digital airwaves. The bosses said, something about raping Condoleezza Rice, and you're all laughing? Then we heard from the Reverend Al Sharpton. Oh, fuck. This was the guy who got Imus fired for saying nappy-headed hose. People took this guy seriously and were afraid of him. The bosses didn't want boycotts or anything else negative that could be stirred up. XM is a public company that needs investors and subscribers. Once again, we were called onto the carpet to speak to the big bosses. I couldn't believe it was happening. Deja vu in the worst way. On May 15, 2007, it was announced that we were suspended for 30 days from satellite radio for content. The medium that had been professing freedom of speech, no restrictions and anything goes, suspended Opie and Anthony for a month for content. Only us. Ironically, we didn't get suspended from K-Rock. However, almost 2 years later, in March 2009, K-Rock decided to change to a dance music format, and then we were just full-time at XM. Our last show at K-Rock was on March 9th. No one had told us that this was going to be our last day. One of our producers, Eric Nagel, E-Rock, found out through a back channel that the company was going to remove us, so we decided to make this our last show, and we announced it. We enjoyed our run while it lasted on K-Rock. It was a cool vibe and fun having Howard's spot in his old studio. The fishbowl that Robin had sat in was still there. We had some really great funny shows at that station. XM began heating up with some personal conflicts. I think Opie had a lot of resentment for the business at that time. We were relegated to a medium that didn't have a lot of listeners. I don't know if he felt guilty about getting fired, but we started understanding what satellite was all about and what we could do to start getting back into the Opie and Anthony show. We wanted to get back to doing things like the wiffle ball bat challenge. We'd take a wiffle ball bat, and if a girl wanted to win, we would put it up her vagina. Then we'd mark it with a Sharpie and measure it. At the end of the year, the girl who got the closest to the middle of the bat would win. Wholesome family fun, right? The bit itself was great. We would treat the bat like it was a priceless antiquity waiting to be auctioned off at Sotheby's. Next is a wiffle ball bats that a woman would stick up their twats on the O&A show. We'll start the bidding at $20. The coveted bat would be displayed in a glass case in our studio. We would always play holy music when taking it out when a girl came to compete. This was okay to do on satellite radio at the time. It was a race that was the sticky wicket and frowned upon. Or it was the race that was the sticky wicket and frowned upon. Sex was completely fine. We'd have girls get completely naked in the studio and perform sexual acts. We had a porn star come in and blow one of our producers in front of everybody. Hey, say what you want, but chicks getting naked and doing crazy shit is always fun. This was when my eyes started roving. Technology was improving with computers, video conferencing, and a thing called Pal Talk, which I used to communicate with the fans. I would get video feeds of people, and sometimes a good joke would come in, or I'd get stuck on discussing a movie, and someone would provide me the answer. It was also good for watching girls in bed. Girls would put cameras of themselves in bed while listening to the show, and be there with their tits hanging out. I got to know them through this, and they got to know, and then got to know them better by actually hooking up with them. I was hooking up left and right with these chicks, thanks to the video conferencing technology. Opie started getting mad at me for this. He felt I wasn't paying enough attention to the show whenever I was looking down at the computer monitor. Well, okay, you got me. This was the slow build-up to our having more problems. He, at this point, was with his fiancée, whom he did end up marrying and is still married to today. He wasn't looking for girls anymore, and so of course enjoyed cock-blocking me whenever he could. In Opie's mind, Jim Norton and I were dogs. We were always on the hunt looking for new conquests.